It started with a single photo, folded neatly inside an unmarked envelope. No return address, no stamp, just slipped under my front door sometime before dawn. At first glance, it looked ordinary, grainy, printed on cheap paper. But when I smoothed it out and really looked, my blood ran cold. It was me, in my own backyard, standing at the grill last weekend, spatula in hand, a beer sweating on the table beside me. Only one problem. Nobody had been there to take it. The fence was high, the gate locked, and the angle, too perfect, too elevated. Looked like it came from somewhere above, like a lens peeking over without permission. My skin prickled as I realized I hadn't just been photographed. I had been watched. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe a prank, maybe some nosy neighbor with a new drone. But as the morning went on, unease settled in heavier than the August humidity. The picture wasn't casual. It was deliberate. Someone had waited, aimed, captured me in a private moment. And the timing gnawed at me. Just yesterday, the association had mailed out its usual newsletter. The one stuffed with warnings about community standards and a polite reminder that unauthorized outdoor structures could result in fines. I'd skimmed it, tossed it in the recycling, same as always. But now I kept replaying the language. The tone had been sharper than usual. Almost threatening. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't shake the thought, so I walked down the street to Clara's house. Clara was the kind of neighbor everyone trusted, sharp-eyed, steady-voiced, and unafraid to speak up when something felt wrong. When I showed her the photo, her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not from the street," she murmured, tapping the corner of the image. "Look at the shadows. Whoever took this was higher up, maybe from a pole, or a camera mounted somewhere it shouldn't be." I wanted her to be wrong, but deep down, I already knew she wasn't. Clara glanced around nervously before adding, "You're not the first one." That's when she brought me inside and shut the blinds. She pulled a shoebox from under her coffee table and opened it. Inside were at least a dozen similar photos. Neighbors in their yards, on their porches, even through their windows. Some showed kids playing with sprinklers. Others captured families eating dinner. Every shot was intimate, moments meant to be unseen. "I found these slipped under my door 2 weeks ago," Clara whispered. At first I thought it was a sick joke, but then I noticed a pattern. The people in these photos, they're the ones who have been fined the most lately. Her words hit me like a punch. The association had been ramping up fines for months. First for trivial things like grass length or trash bins visible too long, then for ambiguous rules like excessive noise or improper outdoor storage. Some neighbors had racked up thousands in penalties, struggling to keep up with payments. I thought it was greed, bureaucracy at its worst. But now, with these photos, it looked like something more sinister. The fines weren't random. They were targeted. The board was using surveillance, illegal surveillance, to build cases, to bleed us dry, to push us toward defaulting on our homes. That night I lay awake, replaying the day in my mind. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every passing car sent paranoia racing up my spine. I kept thinking about where the cameras could be. In the trees? The lampposts? Hidden inside the HOA's spotless community signage that always seemed freshly painted? My thoughts spiraled further. Who was installing them? Was it Alan? The board president with his smug grin and perfect lawn? The man who treated every meeting like his personal courtroom? He always bragged about keeping property values high, but maybe that was just a cover for what he was really after. Power, control, maybe even flipping foreclosed homes for profit. I tried to convince myself it was impossible, but the evidence sat in my kitchen drawer, undeniable. The next morning, more envelopes appeared. Not just at my door, but at several houses on the block. I saw Mrs. Reynolds, an elderly widow who'd lived here 20 years, pick hers up, hands trembling. When she opened it, she nearly collapsed. Clara and I rushed over, and what we saw inside her envelope made bile rise in my throat. It was her, in her bedroom, undressing. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. Mrs. Reynolds clutched the paper like it was poison, eyes wide with horror. How could they? She stammered, unable to finish. Clara wrapped an arm around her, but her voice was sharp when she spoke. This isn't fines anymore. This is blackmail. Word spread fast. By noon, half the neighborhood was buzzing with fear. Some slammed their curtains shut. Others whispered about calling the police. But Frank, the ex-contractor who'd always been skeptical of authority, shook his head. You think the cops will do anything? This is private property. They'll tell us it's a civil matter. Meanwhile, whoever's behind this is tightening the screws. Look around. Property values are dropping. No buyer wants to touch a neighborhood drowning in lawsuits and rumors. And guess who's going to swoop in when folks can't pay their mortgages? The same people running the board. His words were bitter, but they rang with truth. That evening, the board called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. The timing felt too perfect. Dozens of neighbors showed up, clutching their envelopes like evidence at a trial. Alan stood at the front, flanked by two other board members, his smile stretched thin, but practiced. He raised his hands for silence. I've heard there are concerns, he began, his voice dripping with false calm. I assure you, the association takes privacy very seriously. These so-called photos, hoaxes, fabrications, attempts to destabilize our community. Don't let paranoia divide us. His words echoed through the room, but the crowd wasn't buying it. I saw Clara's jaw tighten, Frank's fists clench. Someone shouted from the back, then explain why my fines doubled this month after I covered my windows. Alan didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, voice lowering to a near growl. If you refuse to follow community standards, perhaps this isn't the right neighborhood for you. We can and will enforce compliance, for the good of everyone else. A chill swept the room. In that moment, his mask slipped, and the threat beneath was plain. This wasn't about standards or values. It was about control. And the message was clear. Obey or be crushed. As I walked home from that meeting, Clara fell into step beside me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. We can't ignore this anymore. If they're watching us inside our own homes, then we're prisoners. We need proof. Hard proof. Cameras of our own. Recordings. Something we can't deny. I nodded, though fear gnawed at me. Because deep down, I knew she was right. And I knew the moment we started digging, the board would come after us even harder. Somewhere above us, a streetlight flickered, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt less like home, and more like a cage. Sleep became impossible after that meeting. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Alan's face, calm, smug, and just a little too satisfied as he warned us to comply or leave. I left my blinds drawn and unplugged every device I could think of. But it didn't help. The feeling of being watched clung to me like static. Even in the shower, I kept glancing up at the vent, convinced some hidden lens was recording. By the second night, my nerves were shot. Clara called at 2 a.m., whispering, I just saw a red dot move across my ceiling. Do you think? Her voice trailed off, but we both knew the answer. It was only a matter of time before one of us caught them in the act. The next morning, Frank showed up at my door with a toolbox. Enough hiding, he muttered. We were tearing this place apart. Clara arrived a few minutes later, still shaken but determined. We started with my house, unscrewing outlets, peering into vents, climbing ladders to check light fixtures. At first, nothing. Just dust and wires. Then Clara pulled down one of the smoke detectors in my hallway, and her breath caught. Inside, tucked against the circuit board, was a tiny black lens no bigger than a pinhead. The silence in that moment was deafening. Frank swore under his breath, then smashed it with his hammer. The sickening crunch of glass didn't feel like victory. It felt like confirmation that everything we feared was true. Word spread quickly. By afternoon, at least 6 families had torn open their homes and found similar devices. Cameras hidden in sprinklers, in porch lights, even in the decorative birdhouse Mrs. Reynolds kept by her window. Some were wired, others wireless, but all pointed inward, documenting every detail of our lives. The sheer scope of it was staggering. This isn't just nosiness, Clara said, holding up one of the wrecked lenses. This is a system. Organized. Expensive. Someone put real money into this. But the question remained. Why? The fines were one thing, but the deeper we looked, the more it seemed like the board's goals were layered. That night, Frank gathered us in his garage. A dozen neighbors huddled around his workbench under the harsh fluorescent light. He laid out the evidence like a detective. Broken cameras, copies of the fines, foreclosure notices. Look at the timeline, he said. First the fines start ramping up. Then the photos show up. People get scared. They pay up or they crack. Then the houses start selling. Fast under market. And guess who's buying them through shell companies? He slid a paper across the table. Alan's name wasn't on it, but the LLC was registered to the same mailing address as the association. Clara swore softly. The scheme was starting to take shape. It was a perfect racket. Install cameras, terrorize residents, bleed them with fines, then drive down property values with fear and lawsuits. When desperate families sold out cheap, the board, or their partners, snapped up the homes. Later, when the market stabilized, they'd flip them for a massive profit. On paper, it would look clean, just a neighborhood protecting itself. In reality, it was extortion with a real estate payoff. And we were trapped inside it. As if to remind us of just how trapped, intimidation started that same week. Clara woke up to find a notice taped to her door. Failure to comply will result in escalated enforcement. No signature, no details. Just that phrase in block letters. Frank's truck tires were slashed overnight. My mailbox was stuffed with shredded photos of myself. Hundreds of tiny pieces like confetti, a cruel reminder that someone had thousands of images, and they weren't afraid to use them. Fear spread like mold through the neighborhood. People stopped walking their dogs. Kids weren't allowed outside. At night, cars with tinted windows idled at the corner, headlights off. By day, Alan walked around smiling, waving, pretending everything was normal. I tried to call the county police, but the moment I mentioned association property, their tone shifted. That sounds like a civil matter, the dispatcher said flatly. Take it up with your board. I wanted to scream. How do you take up blackmail and illegal surveillance with the very people orchestrating it? Even if we could prove it. Alan had money, lawyers, influence. We were just a handful of scared homeowners with broken smoke detectors and suspicion. Clara summed it up best. We're fighting a system designed to bury us. That night, after another sleepless stretch, I sat in my kitchen staring at the pile of wrecked devices we'd collected. My house felt gutted, every wall suspect, every outlet a potential spy. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before, a tiny seam in the molding above the window. I grabbed a knife and pried it open. Behind it, another lens glinted back at me. My stomach dropped. We hadn't even scratched the surface. The system wasn't just in obvious places, it was woven into the bones of our homes. The realization spread like wildfire the next day. People ripped apart their basements, their attics, their walls. Cameras were everywhere. The scale was overwhelming, a web of surveillance so dense it felt inescapable. Clara's voice cracked as she said, "They see everything, every word we say, every plan we make. They're always one step ahead because they're watching us live." Her words left us stunned. We weren't just dealing with past recordings. We were living under a constant present eye. The breaking point came at sunset, when Mrs. Reynolds staggered out of her house, clutching another envelope. Her hands shook as she showed us what was inside. Not just a photo, but a video still. A grainy shot of her sleeping in bed, time-stamped from only 3 nights ago. Her privacy, her dignity, stripped away for someone's amusement or leverage. Neighbors gasped, cursed, some even wept. For Mrs. Reynolds, it was the final straw. "I can't live like this," she whispered. "I'll sell. I don't care what I lose." Her words rippled through the group like a funeral bell. If she sold, others might follow. Fear would break us faster than fines ever could. That's when Clara leaned in close, her voice low but fierce. If we don't stop this now, we'll all lose everything. Our homes, our money, our lives. We need proof, and we need it before they take us apart piece by piece." Frank nodded grimly, and for the first time I saw something like unity in his eyes. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a resistance. But as the sky darkened above us, I couldn't shake the thought that somewhere, in some hidden room, Alan was watching the entire conversation live and smiling. And just when I thought the night couldn't get worse, I stepped back inside my house, only to find my laptop open on the counter. I hadn't left it that way. The screen flickered, then a video feed popped up automatically. It was my bedroom, live. The red recording dot blinked in the corner of the screen, pulsing like a heartbeat. Someone wasn't just watching, they were letting me know. The blinking red dot on my laptop screen felt alive, like it was pulsing in sync with my heart. I slammed the lid shut, but the image was already burned into my mind. My bed, my pillows, the most private corner of my home lit up like a stage for someone else viewing pleasure. My skin crawled. I ripped open drawers, yanked cords, flipped furniture, desperate to find the hidden lens. But every time I thought I'd found it, another feed appeared on the screen. My kitchen, my hallway, even the bathroom. No matter how many devices we'd smashed, the network was still alive. Stronger, smarter, watching everything. By the time Clara and Frank arrived, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely explain. I shoved the laptop toward them, forcing them to see what I'd seen. Clara went pale, her hand flying to her mouth. Frank cursed, slamming his fist against the counter hard enough to rattle the dishes. "They're not just spying," he growled. "They're taunting us. They want us to know we're trapped." The words sat heavy in the air. Because he was right. This wasn't about secrecy anymore. It was about control and humiliation, and reminding us that we weren't just residents. We were property in their eyes. That night, the entire neighborhood hummed with paranoia. People tore apart their homes, ripping open vents, smashing fixtures, climbing into attics. Some found cameras, others didn't, but the uncertainty was worse than the truth. Even in the houses that looked clean, no one could shake the feeling of being watched. Curtains stayed drawn, lights stayed off. The neighborhood that once felt like a glossy real estate brochure had turned into a fortress of shadows and whispers. Children cried, parents snapped, and everyone's nerves frayed thin. The financial noose tightened at the same time. New violation notices flooded mailboxes, fines for failure to maintain property, for obstructed views, even for suspicious behavior. The last one made Clara laugh bitterly. Suspicious? They're fining us for not playing along. Mrs. Reynolds, already broken by the invasive photos, put her house on the market. Within days, a buyer appeared. Cash offer, no contingencies. Too fast. Too clean. I know the paperwork listed a different name. Frank dug around and found the trail leading back to a property management group connected to Alan. One house down. Who would be next? The cracks in our resistance started to show. At the next late-night meeting in Frank's garage, half the seats were empty. Some neighbors had stopped coming altogether. Fear was working better than any rulebook. Clara tried to rally us, her voice sharp, almost desperate. "If we let them pick us off one by one, we're finished. We need evidence, proof that this whole setup is illegal. If we get it out to the press, or even online, they can't bury it." But Mrs. Wilson shook her head, her voice trembling. "What good is proof if they ruin us first? They've already got photos of me and my husband in bed. You think my kids won't see that if it leaks? They'll destroy us before anyone listens." Her words left the room in suffocating silence. That silence carried into the following days. Some people started nodding politely to Alan again, pretending nothing was wrong. Others paid their fines without argument. The resistance was shrinking, splintering, and that was exactly what Alan wanted. His smile seemed wider each time he drove by, waving casually from his spotless SUV as if he didn't have a care in the world. The same SUV, Clara noted bitterly, that was parked outside Mrs. Reynolds' house the night before she sold. But intimidation wasn't limited to smiles. Frank's security cameras, his own, not theirs, caught footage of two men in hoodies prowling around his truck at 3 a.m. They didn't take anything. They just stood there, staring at the lens until the feed glitched and cut to black. The next morning, his windshield was cracked straight down the middle, a perfect spiderweb. Clara found her garden gate torn from its hinges. As for me, I woke to find another envelope on my doorstep. Inside was a single photo, this time not of me, but of Clara and Frank standing in my kitchen, heads bent close as we planned. Taken from the same angle as the feed. Proof that every step we took, every whisper we shared, was being cataloged. And used to remind us we had no secrets left. I tried to fight back with technology of my own. I bought a cheap radio frequency detector online, the kind that's supposed to pick up wireless signals from hidden devices. But when I walked through my house with it, the thing went berserk, lights flashing, alarms shrieking in every room. I tried Clara's place, same result. Frank's too. It didn't matter where we went. The whole neighborhood buzzed with invisible currents, a spiderweb of signals so thick it was impossible to isolate. The detectors weren't just useless. They confirmed the nightmare. The system wasn't in our homes alone. It was everywhere. The stress began to eat us alive. Clara snapped at her husband. Frank started drinking heavier, his words slurred by dusk. I caught myself staring into mirrors too long, half expecting to see a reflection that wasn't my own. And all the while, the fines piled up, foreclosure threats loomed, and Alan kept playing the part of the benevolent president in public. At the monthly community barbecue, he stood at the grill, my grill photo replaying in my mind, and declared how proud he was of our safe, thriving community. The words dripped with poison, and half the neighbors clapped anyway. The breaking point came a week later. Clara's scream jolted me out of bed at dawn. I ran outside barefoot to find her standing in front of her garage. Spray painted across the door in jagged red letters were the words, "Stop digging or else." The paint was still dripping, the fumes sharp in the air. Neighbors gathered, whispering, some snapping photos, others backing away. Clara's hands shook as she clutched mine, her voice ragged. "They know it's us. They're coming after us next." But the worst part wasn't the threat itself. It was the sound we heard seconds later, tires screeching down the street. A black sedan we didn't recognize slowed just enough for its tinted window to roll down. A camera lens poked out, clicking, flashing once, twice, 3 times. Then the car sped off, leaving nothing but the smell of burned rubber and the echo of Clara's sobs. We weren't just being watched from hidden corners anymore. They wanted us to see the watchers now. They wanted us to know escape was impossible. The words on Clara's garage didn't fade, even after we scrubbed and painted over them. Neighbors walked by slower than usual, whispering, pretending not to stare. It wasn't just graffiti, it was a declaration. We were marked. Clara barely slept that night, keeping a baseball bat beside her bed. I kept mine in the corner of my room too, though I knew wood would do little against a system this powerful. Still, the weight of it was comforting, like a promise I wasn't going down without a fight. By morning, the story had spread through the entire neighborhood, but reactions were mixed. Some offered sympathy, murmured words about how terrible it was. Others avoided our eyes completely, afraid of being associated with us. And then there were those whose reactions were too smooth, too rehearsed, neighbors who smiled a little too tightly, who said things like, "Maybe if you just followed the rules, this wouldn't happen." Frank leaned close to me that afternoon and muttered, "They've got moles, people feeding them info. Don't trust anyone we don't absolutely know. The paranoia was like a toxin, seeping into every conversation." We couldn't tell friend from foe anymore. Meanwhile, the financial chokehold tightened. 2 more families received foreclosure warnings that week. Their crime? Non-compliance with structural guidelines, a phrase vague enough to mean anything. Both families tried to sell before the bank could take their homes, but their buyers mysteriously vanished days before closing. Rumors swirled that the association was blacklisting anyone who tried to buy from dissenters. And sure enough, a week later, both homes sold at rock-bottom prices to cash buyers connected to the same faceless LLCs. Alan didn't have to crow about it. The silence of those boarded-up windows said enough. Resist, and you lose everything. Clara refused to back down, though I could see the strain hollowing her eyes. She started documenting everything. Photos of broken cameras, screenshots of video feeds, even the spray-painted threat. She whispered about sending it to a journalist she knew in the city. But Frank shook his head. They'll know the second you hit send. Don't you get it? Our internet, our phones. It all runs through their system. You think Alan didn't plan for that? It was hard to argue when my cell service dropped every time we tried to talk about escape. Calls cut out. Emails bounced back. We weren't just isolated. We were digitally trapped. The intimidation escalated from unnerving to invasive. One evening, Clara came home to find her front door wide open. Nothing stolen, no signs of forced entry, just her belongings slightly rearranged. A glass tipped over, a photo frame turned face down, a pair of shoes placed neatly in the center of her living room rug. It was the kind of intrusion designed not to rob, but to terrify. She called me sobbing, and when I rushed over, I saw the message clearly. They could come and go as they pleased. Her locks meant nothing. Our walls meant nothing. That night, Frank set up a camera of his own, an old trail cam from his hunting days, hidden high in a tree facing the street. We gathered around his laptop as he replayed the feed the next morning. At 3:17 a.m., a figure appeared, dressed in black from head to toe. The man walked casually down the sidewalk, pausing in front of Clara's house. He looked around once, then pulled something from his pocket. Keys. Actual keys. He slipped inside like he belonged there, and emerged 10 minutes later, adjusting his gloves. The kicker? When he turned toward the streetlight, his face was briefly illuminated. It wasn't a stranger. It was Paul, the board's vice president. The room went silent, except for the faint hum of the laptop fan. Clara whispered, "They don't even bother hiding it anymore." We wanted to take the footage straight to the police, but Frank reminded us of the pattern. Every time we tried to pull in outside help, the calls got jammed or the story got dismissed. Without undeniable, large-scale proof, we'd be brushed off again. Worse, we'd be branded as troublemakers, giving the board more ammunition to ruin us. Still, we couldn't sit on evidence like this. Clara burned the clip to a DVD, hid it under a loose floorboard in her hallway. "If they come for me," she said grimly, "promise you'll get this to someone who'll listen." The paranoia grew unbearable. We stopped trusting our own homes, started meeting in random places. The playground, the empty pool, even inside Frank's truck with the engine running. But everywhere we went, the sense of being watched followed. One evening, while talking near the swings, I spotted a reflection in the metal chains. A small glimmer. When I leaned closer, my stomach dropped. A pinhole camera embedded right where the chain met the post. The playground, the one place our kids should have been safe, was wired into their network too. I wanted to rip it out with my bare hands, but Frank grabbed my arm. "Leave it," he warned. "If they know we've found too much, they'll accelerate." The word accelerate stuck with me all night. Accelerate what? The answer came sooner than we thought. Around midnight, I woke to a noise downstairs. Not the creak of settling wood or the hum of appliances. This was deliberate, careful. Footsteps. I grabbed the bat, heart hammering, and crept down the stairs. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. The front door was shut, the windows locked. But the smell of cigarette smoke lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. I don't smoke. Nobody in my house does. Which meant someone had been inside, minutes before I woke. Someone confident enough to leave behind the scent of their presence, like a calling card. I checked every room, every closet, but found nothing. Nothing but the growing certainty that walls and doors no longer mattered. The next day, Clara's husband snapped. He packed bags, loaded their car, and told her that they were leaving. House, mortgage, everything be damned. "It's not worth our lives," he shouted, his voice cracking. Clara begged him to reconsider, but the fear in his eyes was too strong. By evening, their car was gone. Clara stayed behind, tears streaming down her face, whispering that she couldn't abandon the fight. I admired her courage, but it terrified me too. Because if Alan knew she was the last one standing openly against him, she'd be the first to fall. Later that week, I stumbled onto something that shifted everything. While walking past the clubhouse, I noticed a door I'd never seen open before, tucked behind the pool pumps, half hidden by vines. It was ajar, just slightly, and a faint glow spilled out. Curiosity overpowered fear. I slipped inside, heart racing. The air was cool, humming with electricity. And then I saw it. A wall of monitors, stacked in neat rows, each one displaying live feeds from our homes, our streets, even our private rooms. A man sat in front of them, headphones on, jotting notes. He didn't see me at first. My breath caught as I scanned the screens, dozens of them, blinking, alive. Proof. Absolute proof. And then the man turned his head. Our eyes locked. His expression flickered from surprise to cold recognition. I bolted before he could rise, my footsteps echoing down the hall. By the time I reached the safety of my house, chest heaving, one thought thundered in my mind. The cameras weren't being run from some distant server, some faceless corporation. The hub was here, in the neighborhood, hidden in plain sight. And now that they'd seen me see it, I knew I was living on borrowed time. The night I saw the surveillance hub, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It wasn't whispers in the dark or flickers on a lens. It was proof, humming and blinking in that hidden room behind the clubhouse. Proof that Alan and his circle weren't simply enforcing neighborhood rules. They were running a full-scale operation, a machine designed to strip us of our privacy, our money, and eventually, our homes. And now they knew I had seen it. I barely slept, the image of those screens burning behind my eyes, knowing that at any moment, someone could come crashing through my door to silence me. The retaliation came faster than I expected. The next morning, a notice was taped to my door. $7,500 in new violations. Improper landscaping, unsanctioned exterior lighting, unauthorized surveillance equipment. The irony made me laugh bitterly. Punished for spying when they were the ones filling our lives with hidden eyes. By noon, my bank app lit up with alerts, late fees, overdrafts, charges I never authorized. Someone was digging through my accounts. Alan's reach wasn't just through cameras anymore. He was in my finances, my livelihood. And it wasn't just me. Clara called, her voice tight with panic. Her credit cards were frozen, her mortgage flagged for review. "They're bleeding us out," she whispered. "They're going to make sure we can't even afford to fight." Frank, steady old Frank, tried to keep us calm. He insisted we had to move methodically, gather evidence, build a case no one could ignore. But even he looked rattled when another family vanished overnight, their house stripped and sold within days. No moving trucks, no goodbye waves. Just gone. Their property relisted under one of Alan's shell companies, ready for some distant buyer who had no idea what blood price had been paid. Every disappearance left the rest of us more isolated, more afraid. Clara muttered that soon it would just be us, the cameras, and Alan's chosen few. Paranoia fractured what little unity we had left. Some neighbors started eyeing us like we were the problem, whispering that maybe we were the reason the board had become so aggressive. "If you stop stirring things up," Mrs. Patterson hissed at me one morning, "maybe we'd all have some peace. Peace." As though silence in the face of violation was anything but surrender. Clara snapped back, shouting that the Pattersons' perfect lawn and spotless shutters were bought with complicity. For a moment, I thought fists would fly. That's what Alan wanted. Not unity. Division. T. Rage turned inward instead of toward him. Then came the break-in I couldn't ignore. I woke to glass shattering downstairs and bolted upright. A shadow moved across my hallway, deliberate and confident. I gripped the bat, my hands slick with sweat, and crept down, every nerve screaming. The figure turned, and the porch light caught his face. Paul, the vice president again, the same man we'd caught on Frank's trail cam. He smirked, like he wanted me to see him. Like this was theater, Intimidation in its rawest form. Before I could swing, he whispered, "You should have kept quiet," and slipped back into the night. My front window gaped open, glass crunching under my bare feet. They weren't even pretending anymore. They owned the dark, the streets, the fear. The next morning, Clara and I decided enough was enough. If we couldn't reach the police through calls, if we couldn't send emails without them bouncing back, we had to do it the old way. Physical evidence, hand-delivered to someone outside. We gathered everything. Frank's trail cam footage, photos of hidden lenses, financial documents Clara had tracked, and most importantly, my memory of that room full of screens. I sketched it in detail. Rows of monitors, the position of the desk, the man's face as he turned. It wasn't perfect, but it was proof. Proof we could risk our lives for. But Alan wasn't going to make it easy. That night, the black sedan returned, idling at the corner with its lights off. Then another car joined, blocking the opposite end of the street. We were boxed in. Clara texted me. They know. My stomach churned as I peered through the blinds, watching silhouettes move against the glow of the clubhouse. They were waiting. Waiting for us to run, to panic, to make a mistake. I thought about my neighbors, the ones who had already disappeared, the ones who had given up, and I realized something terrible. Alan didn't fear us. He feared exposure, which meant our only weapon was getting this evidence beyond his reach. Clara came to my house just before midnight, her backpack stuffed with files and DVDs. Her hands shook as she pressed them into mine. "If I don't make it out, you have to." Her eyes gleamed with a mixture of terror and fire. I wanted to argue, but there was no time. Frank pulled up in his truck, engine low, and waved us in. The three of us were going to try. Just drive. Just break the blockade and get out. But as we pulled away, I saw lights snap on in the clubhouse, shadows rushing out to intercept. Alan wasn't asleep. He was awake, watching, always watching. The chase felt surreal. Two SUVs peeled out from the curb, headlights blinding, engines roaring behind us. Frank gunned it, tires screeching as we swerved through the manicured streets that once looked so serene. Cameras winked from every corner, recording every desperate turn, every scream. Clara clutched the evidence to her chest like it was a newborn, her teeth clenched. "Don't let them take it," she shouted over the roar. My heart pounded so hard I thought my ribs would break. For a moment, I thought we'd make it. But then one SUV cut us off, forcing us into the cul-de-sac near the clubhouse. Dead end. Alan's men poured out, shadows closing fast. Frank slammed the truck into reverse, metal crunching as we clipped one of the SUVs. "Run!" he yelled, shoving the gear stick. Clara and I bolted, sprinting toward the fence at the edge of the neighborhood. Shouts exploded behind us, footsteps pounding. I didn't look back. Couldn't. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but adrenaline carried me over the fence, tumbling hard into the dirt beyond. Clara landed beside me, clutching the backpack, her face streaked with tears and dirt. Behind us, the glow of flashlights swept the fence line, voices barking orders. But for once, no hands grabbed us. No lights followed us into the woods. We didn't stop running until the trees swallowed the view of our neighborhood completely. Bent over, gasping, Clara opened the backpack and pressed the evidence into my hands. "It's not over," she whispered, voice trembling. "It's just starting." I nodded, clutching the files, but my mind reeled. We were fugitives from our own homes, hunted for daring to expose the truth. The hidden cameras weren't just about fines, weren't just about power. They were about control, total control. And Alan wasn't finished. He would never be finished until we were erased, like all the others. I looked back through the trees, the faint glow of our neighborhood still visible in the distance, neat roofs shining like a trap under the moon. Somewhere inside, Alan was watching the feeds, marking our escape, already planning the next move. But for the first time, we had something he feared. Evidence. Proof. A chance to break the silence. Whether it would be enough to stop him, or enough to keep us alive, was a question the night refused to answer. All I knew was that the cameras weren't the end of the story. They were only the beginning.